I call Brendan Burns.
Thank you, Mr Chair. As we deal with Part 3 of this bill, of course, the major part of it relates to the disestablishment of the Environmental Risk Management Authority. And we on the side of the House acknowledge the benefits that could be had by incorporating IRMA into a broader environmental protection agency. There is a sound logic to that. But there is, I think, a flaw in this, and that is that IRMA's staff will make up around two-thirds of the staffing of the new expanded Environmental Protection Agency to take effect from the 1st of July this year. And if you look at the risks to our environment, they are mostly around reputation. We make our living in the world on the basis of our clean, green image. And you only need to look at media overnight and the interview with the Prime Minister on the BBC Hard Talk programme, where he was grilled about whether New Zealand really is as clean and green as the tourism campaign suggests. And the interviewer put to John Key how Mike Joy, a leading environmental scientist at Massey University, had recently said, we are delusional about how clean and green we are. And he made that comment particularly in respect of the issues facing our waterways, with more than half of our lakes and our lowland rivers being polluted. Prime Minister's response to that was he didn't want to get into a flaming row with one of our leading academics, but sort of suggested scientists are a bit like lawyers, you can get whatever outcome you want, which I think is a bit offensive to the science community because they make their interpretations based on science. So I think there's a bit of a smack in the face for the scientific community, who are not like one or two other professions, but are based all of their work on science. And if we consider that this bill is trying to protect at its core the environmental reputation of our nation, which makes two-thirds of its living from what we produce on our, quotes, clean green land. And if we consider that this is not the first time that a leading world news organisation has questioned how tenuous or otherwise our reputation is, how real it is for us to be claiming that we are and marketing ourselves as 100% pure New Zealand, and we are establishing an environmental protection agency which doesn't have an objective and goal of protecting and enhancing our environment, which is made up of two-thirds of its staffing by one important but still relatively small component of the environmental picture. And the key thing that I would have thought the EPA would have been delivering was to enhance and protect that environmental reputation, which is the very core of our basis, economic basis as a nation. So when I look at this part and I see, yes, we have IRMA included in the EPA, and yes, we have climate change included in the EPA, but then I look for the gaps. I wonder why there isn't a division of some kind to manage water or provide policy advice to the Minister on water. And you have to conclude that the reason it isn't there is, one, either budgetary, which is always a reason one has to acknowledge, but two, would the government really want strong science on water from one of its own agencies confirming the sorts of findings that Dr. Mike Joy is finding and which is being quoted to the Prime Minister on the BBC? Would that truly be wanted by a government which has made very clear that the primary objective is rapid new growth, which is seeing allocations of water take place as we speak in Canterbury and other places, and driving a new wave of production in industries such as dairying, not exclusive to dairying, and I have to say that dairying can be done responsibly, but unfortunately far too often that is not the case. So here we have an EPA bill. Mr Chair, here we have an EPA Part 3, which, yes, does include IRMA into the Environmental Protection Authority, yes, does include climate change as an important component, I think probably around 20 staff. So we're now up to 110 staff of around 140. There's the fast-track component, which makes up another portion of the staffing. And I'd like the Minister to take a call at some point and just tell us how many people with some water science experience are there to either agree, so the Prime Minister isn't just basically chipping away at the credibility of scientists when he responds to what I think will be increasing questions from international media and others. Their farmers and farming organisations will be taking note of that interview. What environmental science is the Minister going to be able to access so he can say, well, Mike Joy may have that point of view, but here are our scientists working for the Environmental Protection Authority who actually have a different view? And is it because the science actually is fairly strong? There is not any doubting that we have polluted waterways in New Zealand, and my source for that comment is none other than the Minister himself, who made something of a triumph of noting water quality was deteriorating in New Zealand, vowing that this was going to be turned around, talking about 9 years of inaction on water, and yet yesterday we saw him delivering a national policy statement on freshwater management, which he acknowledges will take, in his words, several years to implement, but in fact when you look at the detail we'll see councils given up to 2030 to bring everything into line in respect of improving water quality. And even beyond that, there are acknowledgements given in the Cabinet paper that where a waterway is too badly degraded, it will not have to come up to any standard. The assessment of improving water quality will be made on the whole region. So in my region of Canterbury, that might mean that Lake Ellesmere, which is a vital source of food for Māori, managed in fact by Ngāi Tahu now, may never have to improve its water quality to a point where it's acceptable once again to swim or take fish or whatever in those waterways. But that will be all right because maybe some improvement made in other parts of Canterbury, and overall, over the next 16 years, water quality will be deemed to have risen to some acceptable point. Those are the kinds of reasons why we should have, within the Environmental Protection Authority, some strong science, some strong water science, and it is a gaping hole in this bill that while we have some coverage in respect of environmental risk management, IRMA, while we have some coverage in respect of climate change, water is a gaping hole. And there is one other, and this might be particularly appropriate to raise tonight because some of us in this House will, once the dinner bell rings, be going to one of the Speaker's excellent series, science series, and tonight the featured topic is New Zealand's leading role in Antarctica. When the Minister spoke to the Select Committee last year, talking about the shaping of the Environmental Protection Authority, he indicated to that Select Committee last year, a year ago this month in fact, June last year, that there would be coverage in the EPA of Antarctica. And that is also not here in the bill under Part 3. It is missing in action. And it is rather curious if you consider how important Antarctica is to the issue of climate change that it's not associated with the Environmental Protection Authority. It is missing in action, and I'd like the Minister to take a call to explain to us why is there nobody going to be employed to oversee water issues. I'd particularly like to know if there are going to be staff on the ground for the EPA in regions such as mine and Canterbury, but I'd also like to know why there's not going to be any staffing for water, and I'm sure part of the answer will be that they're covered by other ministries, but if we're going to have this strong new watchdog, as this was envisaged, called the EPA, surely, when our living is made by water, water should be at the very core of this new agency.
I call the Honourable Steve Chadwick.
Thank you, Mr Chair.